Are the days of Sri Lanka's Tamil tigers numbered? The government says that they're close to declaring a victory in their decades-long war, which has killed 70,000 people. Here to discuss the fate of the rebels' aspirations for a homeland and the likelihood of political reconciliation between the island's communities is Deepa Ollapally of the Sigur Center for Asian Studies at George Washington University. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Are the Tamil tigers on the verge of being defeated?
It's safe to say that military defeat can come any time now. But on the other hand, you know, the tigers are not a finished force at all. And I think what we are going to see is that they are going to be defeated in a conventional sense, but that they'll go back to their roots as a guerrilla force. And there have been a very powerful force in the past, even as a guerrilla force, because we don't see any evidence that they're going to go away anytime soon. Yes.
The rebels used to control vast swathes of northern and eastern Sri Lanka. I mean, territory that a lot of people thought that government forces wouldn't be able to take, and yet they have rapidly taken over these large areas in a very short amount of time. What led the government, though, to want to engage in this military offensive?
Yes, you know, back in 2002, there was a very good chance that the conflict could have been ended politically, with a political solution, with a ceasefire agreement that they actually hammered out after 25 years of this conflict. And the new government that came in 2005 and the beginning of 2006, basically the current president had a new policy. They decided that they were going to go out for an all-out military battle. And until that time, the government had been sort of holding out peace talks, and then, of course, it didn't go anywhere. And it had been a cycle where there was talks, then again conflict and talks and so forth. This time around, the government, you had a hardline group that came to power, and they had a unified vision, I think, because, first of all, the top three people in the government are brothers: the president, the defense minister, and the president's top advisor. So you really have the chance to push through an agenda that probably would not have been there had there been a more fragmented sort of government. But of course now, you know, going down the path of the military poses some real problems in the future.
If the rebels no longer hold the land, where does that leave Tamil nationalist aspirations for an independent homeland? Does that go away because the land goes away?
No, I think the tigers control the land for a decade or so, as you pointed out, and so there's a lot of support for them. They've also built up a lot of institutions and bases in those areas that are not going to just disappear. It's going to be very difficult for the government and the military to hold on to the land that they have now. They're imminently going to be able to control, but they're not going to be able to hold it for a long time. So I think the time is probably going to be on the side of the tigers and on the side of the Tamil nationalist aspirations, because unless their grievances are met in some credible way, I can't see them just changing their agenda completely.
Well, how would those grievances be met if there's no more independent state to be fighting for? I mean, what is the government going to do in terms of addressing Tamils, as they see it, you know, the discrimination in education and in jobs? Is that still there, or has some of it been rectified?
No, I think all of those original demands are still there because, you know, we've been in a situation where it's been mostly conflict. So there hasn't been any real reconstruction or changes in the Constitution. I mean, some of the things that the government has to do is to hammer out a serious constitutional arrangement involving much more serious federal system, which I think the Tamil, at least the population, will probably be willing to accept some form of a real federalism. But that's not, so far we haven't seen the government come up with a serious political plan. I mean, the current government has been focusing almost entirely on the military path. So we don't know what they're going to do. They say they have a political plan. we haven't seen it so far. But on the other hand, I think there is war awareness on all sides. So whether or not the Tigers, once they're militarily defeated at this moment, how far they can regroup, mobilize, support, get their military machine back is going to be a real problem.
And in this latest round of fighting, it's estimated that thousands of civilians have been killed and wounded, and that tens of thousands of more are still trapped inside the conflict zone, and it's difficult to independently verify what's going on because the area is so strictly controlled by the government. Does it fear public scrutiny?
One has to conclude that it does, because on the one hand, right now, journalists, the International Red Cross, human rights agencies, no one is allowed to go into any of those areas, so especially journalists. So we don't really have, we're just sort of, it's partly what the government is telling us versus what we also know to be happening on the ground. According to the UN agencies, there are about 200,000 people who are trapped in about a 45 to 40 square kilometer area that's controlled by the Tigers. The government says it's more like 70,000, so you can see the discrepancy in the kind of numbers that you get.
But why not a ceasefire? Why not set up safe corridors so that innocent people can get out of these areas, whether they're trapped in the fighting between whether it's the Tigers that are attacking them or whether it's the government?
Right. Well, in this case, the government has actually recently set up a 12-mile corridor of a safe haven where it's basically surrounded by, on both sides by the sea, but 12 miles where they're asking people to come to and that they'll have a safe sanctuary there. Now, of course, you hear different reports about why more people aren't coming out. It's very difficult to just sort of up and come through this conflict area, but there's also reports that the Tigers don't really want to let too many people out because, they're having civilians there in that region sort of insulates them from mass government bombings, for example. So
they're holding the civilians as human shields. Is that your assessment?
They could be. But again, because we don't have the information, it's very hard to say. And the government, of course, they have because we're only getting information from the government side right now. And so that's the problem of interpreting what's going on up there.
This war's often been characterized predominantly as an ethnic conflict between Tamils and Sinhalese. Is ethnicity the motivating factor?
As far as, for me, I don't think it really is the main factor. I think economic grievances have been very, very important. There's been a pattern of discrimination against the Tamils, and so one would have thought, and the Tamils, I think, in the beginning, did think that through the democratic system, they'd be able to get their grievances addressed. But, part of the problem was that the Tamil minorities, had been doing fairly well in the education and in the professional sectors. And what the government then did was to start what you might call a reverse affirmative action for the majority. So, of course, it took on it looked then like an inter-ethnic problem. But the funny thing is, or the good thing is in some sense, that the relations between the two ethnic groups among people to people are actually fairly good. I mean, when you go to Sri Lanka, for example, you don't see this kind of enmity that you'd expect after 25 years of conflict. And I think therein lies some hope for the way forward. If in fact one can continue to nourish this kind of inter-ethnic camaraderie, which is still there.
Okay, Deepa Ollapally, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.